Okay, great. That's great. Thanks. Okay. Hi, everyone. Good to see so many of you that I got to see all week. It's been so interesting, this conference, about the number of algorithms that I've heard about. I mean, there's probably hundreds of algorithms that have been represented here and many more that are growing. And, as we think about, there's a saying that, as software takes over the world, machine learning models are going to govern it. And so the types of things that while we're talking about certain algorithms to improve targeting, et cetera, and attribution, what we're talking about is something here, I think, is something much more fundamental. We're talking about ways that these models become pervasive and are going to govern people's lives. And the World Economic Forum, I think, really gets to the heart of it, is the concern around these discriminatory outcomes of machine learning is a human right. So we have a responsibility, I think, collectively, to make sure as we build these models and we use these new technologies that we're building models that are fair and representative, et cetera, as well. And there's also a level of liability that I think we need to start to think about. If you think about if you've been denied a loan at a bank, you don't because of a FICO score, you don't sue the FICO score, right? You sue the actual bank. And so as you start to pull these models through your platforms and start to use them, there's a level of scrutiny that we really need to kind of think about. So I'm going to talk about one particular area. Converseon, we've done machine learning on unstructured social and voice of customer data for 11 years. And language is something that touches all of you, clearly. And it's also very messy data, right? Slang, sarcasm, implicit meanings, et cetera, et cetera. And it's something very timely today. I mean, all of us are living in a very polarized world, living in the world of social media where it's become causing strife and polarization, et cetera. And when we dig deeper into this, as we start applying machine learning, it's critically important because human language is so complicated. The only way that we can actually make sense of language is by using machine learning algorithms that observe humans over time, right? That's it. The old school way was to create dictionaries of positive and negative words, and by proximity you would make guesses if something is positive or negative. But most language is implicit. I say to you, I spent my entire lunch hour trying to exchange my ticket at American Airlines. There's no word in there, right? But you know it is that. Well, the algorithms today can now classify language like humans can. But to do so, they have to learn from humans, and humans do not agree very often, even on basic things when it comes to language. In fact, even on basic sentiment analysis or emotional analysis where you're trying to get some consistency, humans only agree with each other about 60 to 85% of the time. Now let's move on to more complex topics and complex issues, and it becomes extrapolate that, so it becomes really challenging. So as we move forward, we have advocated clearly what you guys are also doing too. It's about, and this also comes from, this is a general framework around, are these models being built with independent data that represents the sample list of the folks that you want to learn from? Can you explain how the decision was made? And the challenge around this, as we get deeper into neural, a lot of this stuff is unexplainable, in any sense. You can explain outcomes, you can see how well they perform, but how they get there is very difficult. And in GDPR, as you've seen, there's a section where there's a requirement. It's not quite a requirement yet, but it's a suggestion that any folks who are exposed to models and get turned down, or they should be explained why that model works and why it did that. It's also about inclusivity and reversibility, and I'm going to talk about each of these things briefly. So I just wanted to lay out kind of 4 particular things. So that's the framework. The question is, what do we do? What can we do to actually make this stuff tangible and useful? So for one of the critical things to make these models work effectively, with machine learning models, there's underfitting and overfitting, et cetera. One of the things that we really need to do is to make sure that we're bringing in diverse opinions. So what we do is we have independent humans look at the same records, the same conversations, and try to get to some level of agreement. And if there's a difference, there's an adjudication process. And if you, just on a very practical example, if I say to you, Home Depot's moving into this new city, right? So is it positive? Well, if I'm trying to do home rebuilding, it's probably a positive. If I have a competitive store and I had, the owner of kind of the small town hardware store, that's probably a negative. Right? And if I'm an advocate for small businesses in my community, it's probably a negative. I mean, everyone is bringing their own biases into the coding experience. And we call these models many times kind of moral mirrors. So whatever bias you have is going to be reflected in these models. And so if we have a bunch of white supremacists who are sitting around building models, we're going to have a white supremacist model, right? So we really need to get diversity of opinion and diversity of the audiences and the targets of the people who we want to talk to and who we care about being brought into this process. The next thing is all these models really should go through a clear validation process. We do a few ones through, we have a platform where you're doing an F1 score, which is precision and recall, which is another real challenge that you have to decide. That's simply, and many of you who are in data science know this already, but precision is how well does that model align with what the gold standard of humans is. In this particular case, 3 independent humans who looks at, they say, yeah, I agree that that's what this means. And recall is how much of that conversation are we actually getting. You can have high precision, I can get a lot of things right, and low recall, I'm missing a lot of the conversation. I can have a lot of recall, I'm capturing most of the conversation, but my accuracy will come down, my precision will come down. And that's relevant in something I'm going to show you in a minute. The other piece is K1s, so making sure that these models can not only work on the data that they've been trained on, but they actually can generalize the data that they haven't seen before. And all too often, these models get deployed without that type of validation. So what we believe is we need to keep humans in the loop for the foreseeable future. We believe in active learning, and that's simply that the algorithms actually score each record based on what it believes it's seen before with a level of confidence, and it's actually looking at threshold stuff that it's not quite sure about, so humans can stay in the loop and improve these things over time. But it also gets back to the reversibility and the fairness. You can intercede on these models when you start to see them going off. These, purely unsupervised models, when you get into neural, et cetera, start to become challenging and problematic. But I recommend one other approach, and that is these are all the inputs and trying to make sure you have the right training data from a diverse amount of people, and you're actually validating these models, et cetera. But I feel that we need to do a feedback mechanism. So for those folks who are out there who feel that they've been wronged by these models, we're collecting that feedback, both from online forums, internal feedback, et cetera. This is actually trust data. These are expressions of trust that people have towards particular brands on social media. So we're actually collecting that to be able to see who are the trusted brands, who are the not trusted brands, and drill down to understand what the challenges are around data or CX issues, et cetera, for that feedback loop. We really want to look at those outcomes as well overall. So a couple quick areas of concern. One is we have this automated machine learning as a service movement happening. It's very powerful. It's putting the power of machine learning into the hands of subject matter experts without having to be data scientists. Very much believe in the democratization of this technology. But the problem with these, too, is some of these models, single analysts spinning up a model and deploying them without this type of validation, et cetera, can also lead to, again, we could have biased models that are impactful. And the second piece is, and this is a little controversial, and I suppose the last slide and the last day, a little controversial, is I get asked a lot now about why aren't the social platforms simply building models to be able to filter out some of this polarized speech, right? I mean, it's a big debate. Should Facebook do this or not? And I have a certain perspective on it. If you take a look at, this is something that actually Facebook filtered recently. You could read through it. Now think about 3 independent humans who are looking at that and coming to agreement of saying, does this fall into kind of abusive speech? Is this kind of, hostile speech? It turned out that it was actually from the Declaration of Independence. And so now let's extrapolate that. So even the best intentioned models, it's the precision recall score again. Yes, there's stuff that's obvious, negative, hostile speech. There's a lot of stuff that's blurry in the middle. So just trying to get agreement on what that means and what that looks like can go further, doing the precision recall to say, do we actually try to pull all of it out and take stuff out that we probably shouldn't take it out, or do we do high precision and leave a lot of this stuff in? There's a much bigger conversation around all of this. I think it's just buyer beware of how we move into this direction, because there are challenges about the application of machine learning to this type of complex data. And that's it. So thank you.